So let's get into it. I am joined by Kat from 10 Letter PR, and we did briefly talk before this about Kat introducing herself. So, without me completely butchering up your introduction, I'm going to let you take the floor and tell everyone about yourself.
Amazing. All right. So my name is Kat. I run 10 Letter PR, 10 Letter Radio alongside my team. We're actually 10 years old this month. Um,
Congratulations.
Thank you. So that's really exciting. Before that, I used to run a music channel on the Sky Network called Channel U, and did that for like 7 years. So yeah, I've been in the industry a long, long time. Very much predominantly working with the British black music scene, and independent artists, DIY artists, like right through the kind of DIY culture of like, like the early noughties and then, kind of into the last decade. And yeah, still here, still working with many independent artists, many upcoming artists, like trying to promote them, and raise their profile and get them to the next kind of level. So yeah, that is me in a nutshell.
Wow. Oh, well, so lucky, and so grateful to have you here. Let's jump in, first of all, with some very fun quick fire questions, just to really round off you in a nutshell. So, what is your favourite song at the moment?
Right, okay, so I would probably go for maybe Hide and Seek by Stormzy. A
Yeah.
vibe, like a real vibe for me at the moment, yeah.
Yeah, he dropped that and then left and then was like, do you know what? I'm actually coming back now. It's my
Trust
time
me.
again.
I
Um,
know, I love the way he does it. Like, like he literally, when it comes down to PR and radio and everything, I mean, like Stormzy's got it nailed now.
yeah, I mean, so to jump into it straight away then. I mean, as somebody who has been in the industry 10 years, let's use Stormzy as an example. What are some of the things he does perfectly then that just immediately capture all that attention and almost give him that lectern to say, here, I'm going to drop this song.
Do you know what? I think obviously, like he's like a kind of exceptional example because he's used the media and kind of like PR and radio in completely his own way. He's obviously played the game kind of in his kind of earlier days as an artist, but obviously now on the other side he's absolutely able to control the narrative with them, and exactly like we say, he's just come out of nowhere and dropped it and everything's like everyone's all over it. And I think obviously coming away from social media, etc., and they're all the things that you probably don't do at the start, but he's got to that level now where he can control that himself, whereas you need to be really careful about kind of how you're using it and when you're using it on the come up. And I think like to be fair, there is an element of kind of deciding as and when you do want to use it, and as well like how you want to come across, like what your profile is with these things. So like you're always in control of that no matter where you are, like kind of like in terms of profile.
Yeah. And I mean, like, is there any things that you see like him do with a PR company behind him that you think, okay, you don't have the profiles and the merge artists right now to do those kind of things, but are there just like inherent characteristics when you're going to do a release that any artist can kind of replicate?
Well, I mean, obviously he's got like like he's been with the same PR company for a long time, and like they've had a really good relationship and like built him along the way. But it's like kind of I think it's identifying key moments, it's identifying like things that you can do that are just that little bit different, and using them to your advantage. Like why are they going to be newsworthy? Because he could have definitely just like done the same old thing, like like the same old music releases, the same kind of like campaigns as everybody else. But it's like the simplest things that he does, and as well as a person, aside from his music, it's that people are really invested in when it comes to Stormzy too. So it's things like kind of like Thought Park, and when he kind of like took all that out for his birthday, and that became a huge moment, and there was all these celebrities there, etc., etc. And then it's, you know, like the things that he does with, like, you know, universities and giving back and all that, and like that just puts him, you know, kind of at a different, in a different place, and on, like, you know, like on a different level, and keeps him incredibly credible and newsworthy.
Yeah.
So then he's able to do that, like he's then able to control that when it comes down to his music, and decide as and when he needs their support, like with that.
Yeah, yeah. I guess like as an artist, is it always important to try and kind of control that kind of narrative around you, or like whatever, or interact with your fan base enough that there is this like waiting, this expectation that something's happening, and you've got them kind of here, if that makes sense?
I think, like I said, you know what? I think, you know, kind of, it's especially for emerging artists, that's like it's a long way off. Like you don't really have, you know, kind of the luxury at first. I do think that what's important though is, you know, kind of ensuring, even when it comes down to working with a publicist, and like even when it comes down to writing your first press release, for example, like it's important that it reflects who you want to be, and like who you are as an artist, and what you're trying to say. Like, you know, because obviously you're working with different people that, you know, for me, for example, like I listen to music, and then I take it on board, and, you know, kind of it's then when I write a press release, it's my interpretation of their music and how they've come across, and, like, you know, their profile and everything else. Like if there's something wrong with that when someone's written something for you, then absolutely, like, you're in control of kind of saying, do you know what, that's not quite right, or I'd like to change this, or, you know, whatever that might be. And then obviously that goes out to press, so at least it's there, like whatever is being said is your way of saying it.
Yeah. I guess there's going to be some artists who might decide that, like, okay, I don't think I want to sign with a press PR company right now, but I still want to do my own press releases right now, or, you know,
Yeah.
I still want to send this stuff out. Is there any top tips that you can just give about writing a press release? Because, you know, you're not taught a press release in school. I don't know when, like, the only chance I guess you may have a chance of interacting with a press release is seeing other artists' press release. So,
Yeah,
you
sure.
know, what is some things that are really good to put in a press release, and what are some things that are not so great?
Yeah, I think so. A press release is basically, there's a big difference, and obviously, between a bio, right, and a press release. And I think some people get this confused a little bit sometimes. Your press release is basically your selling point. Your bio. Let me close the door. Sorry, hang on 1 second. I've got my naughty dog barking a bit. Um, hey, can you hear it?
Not really. So,
Okay, that's fine. I think it's more me. I'm just like concerned that like everyone can hear him. So I think the key thing with that is there's a bio and a press release. The bio is literally like kind of all the information about you, very factual. You know, like very, like, you know, very much based about kind of like your achievements, what you've done, like, you
right,
know, kind of where you're from, maybe what your influences are, etc., etc. Your press release is specific to whatever it is that you're doing at that time, whether or not you're releasing an EP or a mixtape or a single or whatever else that might be. And usually they quite often go hand in hand with each other. For me, for example, I would use a biography to help me write a press release. So if you're doing it yourself, when you're writing a press release, it's about all your key points. Like you're selling yourself in the shortest amount of time, with like, you want like maybe 2, 3 key paragraphs. You're talking about kind of release dates. You're giving people an idea of, you know, like a timeline. You might be giving it like, you know, like the best things of what's happened, like, you know, like what gigs you might have done, like the top gigs you might have done, any collaborations that you might have done, like just key things that are really going to sell it in. Like that is your biggest marketing tool when it comes to kind of pushing that out somewhere. And a lot of those key points would also be relevant in terms of, they might all be like, you know, they're the key points that you might use for something like pitching into Spotify for artists, for example. So, you know, like all those key moments, you know, that are really going to sell yourself, that's what needs to be in there, but in quite a nice conversational way.
Right. And
Yeah.
you just mentioned, I guess, Spotify and stuff. Like, okay, so you've wrote your press release and you've got that and you're kind of sending it off and that's cool and you're sending it out to people and you're getting traction back. You've just said, pitching your music to Spotify. Can you tell me a little bit more about that pitching your music to streaming services world? Because, from an outsider, like you don't like I don't really think people know about how to pitch their music to these streaming services, how to get in the door, and then subsequently also how to get onto those playlists and things like that. And what's the
Sure.
difference between the
Sure.
two?
So with regards to this is like almost like a slightly different world to like PR and radio, but obviously it's very relevant because kind of all the cogs turn together when it comes down to kind of a music campaign as such. And obviously like DSPs like your Spotify, your Apple, all those kind of places, they're like super relevant now and they're super relevant for what we do too. So with Spotify, for example, they have Spotify for artists. So as an artist, you get like you get your own kind of profile on there, and when you are releasing music, you can write a pitch within that, and and that will be kind of like it will talk about kind of who you are, what you're doing. It'll probably give links to your social media, for example. It might talk about kind of any like kind of major wins that you've had in the past, whether that be like former playlists or kind of radio plays or anything that's going on, like that when it comes down to the editorial teams and the guys that are like overseeing all those playlists and everything, they're looking at things and basically saying, oh okay, like this person's doing this and this person's doing that, and like it then puts you in the running for having those playlist spaces.
I
So
see.
it's really important. Like, I think it's like really important, and it starts to like you can do that yourself. Like you don't need to have someone to do that for you. And obviously, like kind of a lot of distributors, for example, they have like you can have like a label services deal, they call it, which is you can have like your regular distribution. Okay, so you just upload it and then it
Right.
appears
Yeah.
on the DFPs as and when like you've set the release date. The next level to that is to have a label services deal, and that's kind of like you've got someone, like you kind of got somebody there rather than it just being like, oh, it's uploaded and it magically appears on Spotify on the right day, but you've actually got someone to talk to, and kind of like a team there helping you, and they quite often do the pitches and things like that. But in this early stage, like you can absolutely do that yourself. Just say all, like say all the good points, and kind of like make it as make it as impressive as you can. Like you're selling yourself in there. So I think that's like you can easily do that.
Yeah. And these selling points, like, are these just like are they like just streaming numbers, or are they like I perform with these collectors, or I'm collaborating with this people, or like?
Yeah, no, it's everything. It's kind of like it could be okay. So I've had this radio play over on that station, and BBC Introducing have played me over there, and like I've done like on my last track I got like 10,000 streams or whatever. Do like anything that kind of covers your music and what you're doing? Like, oh, I've got a gig at wherever, and like all these different things. I'm doing a schools tour, or anything that you could sell into it that just says, this is what I'm doing right now.
Mm, okay.
And in the future, like perhaps you might have like, I don't know, like a collaboration with somebody coming out, or like, oh, I'm going to be featured on this person's album or mixtape or whatever it might be, and they might be, if they're further on, like that's really helpful as well, because it like it just shows kind of where you are and where you're going.
Okay. So it's really building that whole kind of environment around you.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, absolutely. And I think with any of these things, like with PR, with radio, with like the DSPs, everyone, when you're doing it yourself, like obviously all of these things can be quite expensive when you're going to get PR, when you're going to get radio, all that kind of stuff. So the more you can do by yourself initially, the more relationships you build. Like it just gives you that solid foundation across the board, and it also gives you that understanding, so that when you do have someone on board, what you're talking about.
I see. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I mean, you just touched on it like just then. I guess, you know, as 10 letters just turned 10, and you do PR, you do radio, you do press. Can you break down what each of those strands are and then what each of them aim to do?
Yeah, sure. I think like for all of them together, like the whole aim is to raise profile, whether that be of like, your particular release, but ultimately of you as an artist. I think one thing to be clear about when it comes down to like anything that you're taking on with these things, it's a building process. Like, you're very unlikely to just go and get one campaign for one single and that's going to be life changing. I think it's got to, and I think that that's another thing to be really to really consider when you do start taking on PR, because it's great to take it on, like PR, radio, whatever it might be, like any kind of promotion. It's great to take it on, but obviously it costs. So then, do you have the budget to be consistent with it, whether or not it's like twice a year or 3 times a year or whatever it might be? Like you can't just be like, right, this is the single, I'm going to put everything into it and then kind of disappear from it and then not have anything out for a year, because otherwise it's a bit pointless. Like you need, it's always a building block. So for example, like with the radio side, we like the first thing with us is whether or not we like the music. We would only take something on whether or not like we like it, we can see the vision with it, kind of we understand the artist and where they're trying to go with everything. So when it comes down to the radio side, we obviously identify targets, see whether or not they've been supported previously. If so, obviously we make sure those previous supporters are covered. And then obviously it's like building on top of that, like everything's the next building block. So it's like identifying the key targets within it, and then it's a case of like usually our campaigns are around a month. It's then about building that going forwards and like building the campaign, building the music from maybe having its first play or its premiere or whatever into, like further community support, and if it gets to the point into like playlist conversations and everything like that. Over the course of a year, a couple of years, we like to then get it to a point where it is in playlist conversations and, you're kind of getting that wider support, but it does take time and consistency to do that.
So this is a long haul thing, never a short
100%. Yeah, absolutely. Like 100%. Like if you choose to take that route, it's about building those relationships. I think you've got to understand as well, from the flip side of it, when you're bringing when you're asking for this support of DJs or like media platforms or anything like that, and you start that journey, there's always other artists that have been on that journey a lot longer. So it's almost like, okay, why do you take priority over somebody else that has been doing it for so long in order to get that support? And that's why as well it's important to build and to keep the consistency, because if they're going to give you their support, especially as a DJ, right? Because some DJs might have a show once a week, right? So they're limited as to who they can support and how much they can support. So with that being the case, if they're giving you their support, they're supporting that because obviously they genuinely like the record, or like they really feel that you've got something like about your artistry. So you need to keep giving that back. Right. You need to keep going with that and building on that, because if you just kind of fall off and then like you're disappeared from nowhere, like it makes it harder for them to support going forward.
Yeah. So it's you as a company put the trust in that artist to know that, okay, they've got to this point where they're serious and they're in for the long game. Mm-hmm. And then this is when now we're going to put our time and effort in, as you just said, for years.
Yeah, I mean, like 100%. Like a lot of our artists and a lot of the clients that I've worked with, like they're in it for a long time before, kind of it might really start going off.
Yeah, and can you talk to me about the other 2 strands, and then we'll get on to I think like myths and things like that.
Yeah, sure. So like on the PR front, so obviously radio is quite self-explanatory, like, you know, and especially within the music that we work, there's quite a recognised route, and there's like a lot of community stations, which is brilliant. Not all genres kind of have, you know, like a full network the way that kind of we do. So obviously you've got a lot of community stations that feeds into like the national stations, like your One Extras, your Capital Extras, Case, like all those kind of places. Obviously you can build, the great thing about doing radio as well, that you don't get so much with kind of just focusing on social media or marketing or anything like that, or even, you know, like, and so much PR, is you get to really you get to flex your muscle in the interviews. Do you know what I mean? And it can, and especially in those early days when, you know, like, there's a lot of value in doing things like community radio interviews and things like that, because it's a training ground, right? And it's like, you know, kind of, you can really start to see what works for you, like, you know, like, you can really see, like, you know, how you like interviews to go, what you need to give in an interview, like, you know, what works well for you. And so I think there's like a lot to be said for kind of like doing that groundwork with kind of smaller stations and then building it in, because the last thing you want to do is kind of be put into a position where, you know, like, you're on like a major radio station or whatever, and then you're doing, like, giving this terrible interview, because, you know, like, it's such a great platform to have. On the PR side, obviously, again, like, there's some great opportunities for artists, whether on a lot of platforms do their own like playlists, for example, things like that. So that can be an extra added, like, you know, touch into things, like, whether or not it's new music, like, you know, new tracks released, etc., etc. So they, like, you know, like, those kind of features can be great. They can also be really good to have moments that kind of live online and that you can reference going forward. So whether or not that be, you know, an introductory interview with, like, I don't know, like a Notion magazine, or, you know, a premiere with Clash or whatever. These are moments that then you can use to bounce into radio and say, like, oh, and it's had this play, and it's had this support, and it's had that support. And the same with DSPs, you use that to say, oh yeah, and when you're saying about like the Spotify for Artists pitch and all that kind of thing, and your press release, oh, and they've had support from Clash before, and Notion magazine, and da 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 da, and all of a sudden it kind of like the bar raises, and, like, you know, there's so much more to talk about. So the PR side kind of covers more of like the online, like, digital press side of things, magazines. Obviously, there's not, you know, there used to be a lot of print. It doesn't happen so much now. But all, like, you know, like podcasts, anything like that, like, kind of that encompasses that area.
Yeah. So are you putting those artists in those places and almost being like, okay, here's the chair, this, or are you working with them like one to one all the time, and then you're like, okay, there's these opportunities, like, do they pick? Is it actually more you find the exact opportunities that are right for them? Like, what's the almost process?
Yeah, so obviously when we first get you know, like, music through, like a track or an inquiry, like, from an artist, label, whoever, our key thing would always be like to see where things are initially. Like, you might have done loads of groundwork yourself, or you might just like be absolutely brand new to it. And from you might have had like a few little bits of support before, you might have had nothing. So our first port of call is to kind of identify like exactly where an artist is in terms of profile. And from there, we then can work out our targets of like where we think, do you know what, this would be like, you know, like, these would be the ideal places. And we always picked high. Do you know what I mean? Like, we always want it to travel as far as it can go and get the most out of it. So we'll go right across the board with like press targets, radio targets, and from there we then pitch in. So we'd say, like, look, we've got this artist, like, this is what they're doing, da 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 da, this is their music, this is the release date, you know, kind of give them all of that information. And then it's the platforms that pick whether or not, yeah, okay, yeah, we really like this, we're going to support it, or we're not. I mean, one thing to say with all, and again, with hence why it's a building process, right? We you're going to get a lot of knockbacks at the start.
Right.
Like, there are loads of knockbacks at the start, and that's why you know, like it's probably the hardest work. Hence why, you know, kind of when you get to like Stormzy level, you can control it. Whereas like, you know, it's kind of in those early days, there's an awful lot of pitching, there's an awful lot of door knocking, there's an awful lot of no's. But we go as far and as wide as possible. And then from there, you can start identifying who's really getting behind something, use that like in the future, and then build off that with each release.
Yeah. So, like, that kind of segues us on to myths because I think, like, if I was an artist and I signed with a PR, I'd be like, or PR, radio, and press, I'd be like, okay, like, it's going to be yes, 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 and yes. And you've just said, you know, no, there's a ton of knockbacks. And I guess as an artist then who would go into that, you know, how do you make sure then their confidence doesn't get completely knocked and they feel like, oh, I'm not good enough, or oh, I've made the wrong
Yeah.
decision then? Like, because there must be some artists who go into it just assuming now it's like a bit of an easy road, there's lots of yeses.
Sure. Yeah, no, and you're quite right. I think one of the key things when I'm doing my job is transparency. I
Mm.
think it's transparency, managing expectations. Like at the end of the day, you know, kind of our clients are giving us money. Like, but I think one of the main things to consider in this conversation is when you're doing PR and radio, you're paying for a service. Like you're not paying for the results.
Mm.
Um, I think that we're very, like I say, we're very transparent with stuff. If I thought for a sec, like when we take something on, it's played to the whole team. And if one of the team, like for example, like if they said we're right, want PR and radio, if the head of radio for me turned around and said, do you know what, Kat? I just don't think it's right for radio. I would literally go back and say, do you know what? We can do the PR on it, but we wouldn't do the radio. We just don't think we're going to get enough out of this for you.
Mm.
And I think I mean, obviously we work the way that we work. I can't say that everybody works in that way. But I think that, you know, you've got to it's about being very realistic with yourself. And I think as an artist that can be very, very hard, like, you know, especially when, you know, like you're the artist, you've done all the creating, you've obviously got so much belief in what you're putting out there anyway, but sometimes it can just be the wrong PR that you've gone to, or, you know, like, and obviously music is like, you know, it's subjective, right? So like if what you might like I might not like, and you know you might just not that just might not have been the right connection between you and that one particular person and that one particular track. So I think it's really important, you know, you don't just have to go to the same person and stay there. Like, you know, you're absolutely able to go to different PRs and find out what works for you, and you know, kind of like get different opinions on things, and then wait. But don't be you know, like don't kind of like be kind of gaslighted by someone to like, you know, like just giving you everything that you want to hear. Do you know what I mean? Like I think you've got to kind of almost like distance yourself from like the emotion of like the record and your creation, and actually like listen to what's like the feedback that you're getting, like because if it otherwise you're going to spend a lot of money on things that might not be able, like might not work. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, no, massively. So, you know, it is things like, you know, shop around, listen to what these people are saying. I think it's so fascinating that you just said that, you know, everything gets played to the whole team, and, you know, the artist comes to you saying, I would like press and PR, or just press, or press PR and radio. And then if one person from your team goes, it's not right, you know, you go back to them with this transparency and realism. I mean, like, is there any other things that you have said, you know, to artists before on that realistic and transparent way about expectations and things like that?
100%, because I think like, you know, like it's easy to get kind of, you know, carried away, but like, you know, like with kind of the expectation, and obviously when you've put so much into, like I get it, like when you've put so much into like, you know, the creation, and then you've found all this money and this budget to then go and get PR and radio and everything else, that of course that kind of there's a lot depending on it for you. But I think that that's why you know, like when it comes down to our plans and our, you know, like targets and everything else, we talk it right through. Like, you know, like when we're getting feedback on everything, like, you know, like the feedback's given to all of our clients. Like we do reports every single week so you can see exactly what's going on, exactly what the feedback is. And I mean, there's times that we've kind of done a month-long campaign and then like within 2 weeks we're like, do you know what, this just isn't doing what we thought it would do, and we'll pull it and say, right, we'll either need to switch onto a different track, or let's hold that last 2 weeks and go on to something new. It doesn't happen very often because you obviously need like a level, like an amount of time to kind of get things going. But if we ever felt that way, like we'd be 100% transparent about it and just say like, no, you need to stop that now, and like we need to go on to something else because it's just not working. And sometimes it just doesn't work.
Got you. And it's less about the end product, as you said, and just more about, I guess, that experience, that advice, that connections. I guess, like, my question would be, like, when is it the right time for PR? And that's such an open-ended question, but, like, when is it not the right time as well?
Yeah, I think that, you know, kind of, and when you're doing it independently, it's obviously, you know, it like there's a lot of budget that goes into it. So I think that kind of, like I said to you before, like knowing that you can be consistent with PR is like really important. And I think that I think once you've done as much as you can yourself and you kind of understood, like, you know, kind of the route that you want to take, like you're kind of understanding exactly who you are as an artist. I think at that stage, it's, you know, like you can kind of have that conversation, say like, do you know what, I think that, you know, like we're ready. I would always kind of say that, you know, kind of like building a bit of a following first, you know, like having some kind of, you know, like whether it be Spotify success or, you know, like streaming success in some way, like kind of ticking all those boxes first, I think is really, really important. And I mean, you can reach so many people yourself. So I think until it gets to that point where you're literally just like, right, I've got as far as I can take this, I need to kind of hand it over to someone now. I think that that's probably like a really key point to do it.
Yeah. I mean, should artists be looking to reach as many ears as possible? Is that always the direction they should be going? Or should they be looking at kind of only going to a certain amount of listeners?
No, I think that obviously, like, you know, like at the end of the day, like everyone's trying to build as big a profile as possible, in which case they need to reach as many ears as possible. I don't, but then obviously, you know, you've got to do that in a genuine way and build like a genuine fan base through that. I think that that's, you know, like people, like in certain genres, you find that like they have quite a niche following, but they're so supportive that they could do like sell out, you know, gigs and etc. etc. So I think that it's not just like the quantity, it's the quality of your following as well. And again, like, you know, like kind of just identifying like the champions within that, whether or not that be like, you know, you're following at press and radio and everywhere else, or just your fan base. But I think that, you know, kind of what I think what's important for an artist is for their fans to understand who they are and their music and kind of where they're going. Because I think if it changes and chops around too much, I think that becomes quite difficult as to like to find who exactly you're trying to target.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think are the challenges right now for emerging artists releasing music, either with or without PR, press, and media?
So I mean, to be honest, I think it's quite. I have this conversation quite regularly because I think that it is quite difficult, especially given the fact that kind of streaming's so open, and it's almost like a catch-22, isn't it? Because you're a brand new artist, you're putting things out there. However, it's how are you going to get the, like, you know, like those editorial like playlists and all that kind of support without, you know, like already having that profile. So yeah, I think that there is quite a few, you know, like things to consider when it comes down to that side of it. And you know, and again, and like budgets as well, like budgets are challenging. Hang on one second, sorry.
That's all right. So, guys, keep putting your questions in, please. I can already see them popping in, so we will get to those in a little bit. But do carry on.
Sorry. Yeah. So I think that there is a huge like emerging artists are against a lot, but I think that that's why it's really important for you to do as much as you can early on, whether and like kind of reach out to people. There are so many people you can reach out to. Like there's so many people in terms of like journalists and kind of like radio DJs, and like you can do so much of that groundwork yourself. Absolutely.
Yeah, and when you are reaching out to those people, is there a right way and is there a wrong way? And what may those differences be?
Yeah, I think that this one's like a huge one for me, actually. This is a really important question. I think that having don't do the copy and paste thing. I think make things personal. Do you know what I mean? Like, at the end of the day, you're building a relationship. So that's like, kind of like, it's not just like, oh, I like your fun, like, like someone like, like, oh, can you check out my new music? Like, it's not that. Like, you really need to kind of get into it with someone, and they need to know who you are. Like, I think kind of not making yourself vulnerable as such, but like really kind of getting into like who you are, like in the kind of shortest possible way as well, without kind of being too in depth about it. It's just like people, let people know what you're doing. Talk to them, make it personal, and then like send them something that's simple. So for example, it might be like here's a link to like like my new release, and that might have like the artwork in it. It might have a couple of press shots of you in it. It might have like, it'll obviously have like a radio edit. If you're sending it to radio, make sure it's a clean radio edit and they're able to play it. And make sure everything's titled, because these people are getting hundreds of files and everything. Like we get stuff all the time, and it's just like, can you check this out? And you open a link or get like a WeTransfer or whatever, and it's just like track number 3, and I'm like, oh my god, and I'm like, I need to have artist name on it, I need to have like a track title. So then I end up going back to someone and I'm like, yeah, like I really like this, but what's the track called? Like I don't even know what your track's called. So like having all that information and just like like take pride in it, like have those like names correct, like like yeah, all the titling, like make it kind of like simple and effective. A Dropbox link, WeTransfer link, something like that, just so that you've not got a million different attachments on an email, all that kind of thing. Like that is absolutely ideal to like send out. And like I said, like you can even do things like, if it's going to be to a radio DJ, for example, or like there's a journalist, for example, if you've identified them as a target for you, then what I would suggest is like, how have you identified them? Like, have they played someone kind of similar to you, or like like, or do you tune into their show, like whatever it might be? Like, tell them that. Do you know what I mean? Don't just be like, oh, like like I'm an artist and I do this and da 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 da. Like it's just like make it about them too. Like they're a human being as well. So I think like and sometimes we lose that personal connection. So I think that's like really important.
Yeah, and do you think it's better to, I guess, like email loads of people in that industry or in that station or whatever, or is it better to actually find which ones like champion your scene anyway, like champion your music scene and like
100%. No, I think like yeah, don't just do like the whole like copy and paste info at whatever radio station, da 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 da. Like find the people. Do you know what I mean? Like find those people that you really think like your music will really resonate with them. So I think that's yeah, absolutely, like kind of identified the key people within that scene. And it's difficult, like you can't stay on top of like every single relationship. So I think like like if you do have those champions, like they feel special too.
yeah 100%. And for artists, so obviously some artists would have got approached maybe by press PR companies and things like that, and I mean, is there anything they should look out for? Obviously, you are one press and PR company, and as you already said, it's very important to know, lots of companies work differently.
Yeah.
But as somebody who's been in that industry for so long now, you know, is there things that artists should look out for?
I think you I think when you're kind of going into something like this, and like when you're going into anything new, right, you're kind of, you don't really know how it works, so you just trust that everybody's kind of going to be looking out for you. I think, as in with any kind of industry and stuff, some people are just there to make money, and you know, like, and that's absolutely fine. But I think what you've got to understand is you've got to trust in your instinct. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you, um, I mean, I myself have never kind of reached out to an artist. Like, that's not kind of in an egotistical way at all. It's just because we've always had so much work happening, that we've kind of never been in that position that where we need to go looking for work, and we've always kind of been recommended, etc., etc. So I think that, you know, kind of when you're an artist and you're looking for something, or people approach you, just be like, you know, just be very careful. Like, some people might have that real genuine, like, they might have found you on Spotify or Instagram or whatever, and they might genuinely like really like it and really want to like help you, in which case amazing. But I think that don't be scared to have those conversations. If you're about to hand something over, like if you're about to hand over your music to somebody, like, make sure that feels right, and make sure like they understand you as an artist. Make sure that you feel confident in them as well. Like, it's a two-way street. Like, it doesn't just have to be like, oh my god, like, you know, like, I've got like a PR company and da 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 da, and hand it over to, like, you've got to feel confident in them.
Right. And I mean, is there any examples where, you know, you've seen where an artist has done that correctly, has like either like, you know, they've known their worth, so they've made sure they're not going to get like played, etc., or even just they just know their music, they know what they're doing, and they've gone, yeah, actually this is right for me. And is there any examples that you could share with us, maybe?
I think, I mean, we've been really lucky to have like quite a few. I mean, like I said to you before, like we've turned down many campaigns, and do you know what? And sometimes we've got it wrong, and well, and I say wrong in terms of the track's gone on and, like, you know, a bit of a top 40 hit and all that kind of stuff. However, it's not necessarily been wrong for what we do, because we just didn't feel it at the time. So I would never say like, oh, it's wrong, like, you know, because, oh, we should have taken it just because it ended up being a hit. Absolutely not the case. But it's like, you know, that's how kind of like, you know, genuine it is with it when it comes to us. I think we've I've definitely known people that have been approached by PR companies, and then after doing like a bit of homework themselves, you know, they've decided that they didn't feel quite right about working with them and chose not to. And it's given them, you know, like a real sense of concern when it comes to like approaching other companies, like, oh, like, is this how PR works? Like, everyone's just trying to have me over with it and all that kind of thing. And it's not. Like, that's why I think that it's very much about finding the right place for you and being confident in what someone is bringing to the table, having complete clarity as well on like what they're offering you, what their service is, you know, kind of like, is everything that they're doing like a genuine service, like, you know, kind of, are you getting genuine results from it? So I think, you know, and it's another good reason why it's good to talk to different companies, because you find out how like, you know, different companies work.
Yeah. And I mean, for an artist, like, if they do approach you, you know, do they have to approach you and then immediately want, you know, press PR and radio, or can they approach you with advice first and like with tracks? Like, do they have to immediately approach you and be like, yeah, I need X, Y, and Z?
No, oh my gosh, we get this all the time. I think because we work with so many kind of upcoming artists and, you know, emerging talent and stuff, like, and I think, given my kind of history of like all everything that I've done, I'm very much about, you know, kind of helping someone understand it and kind of like, and doing it at the right time. So I think, like, you know, like, we have many people that come to us and they say, look, this is where I'm at, I've got this track, like, you know, like, it's just come out, like, you know, kind of, what do I do? Like, you know, I'm thinking about doing a video, you know, at the start of next year for it, and da 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 da. And we would go back and like have that conversation with them and work it through in terms of, you know, usually we take things on before anything's released, so that we can get the most out of something for you. Um, it might be a case of someone sends something like 3 tracks, and they say, look, I've got these 3 tracks, I know that I want to put them out, but I don't know how to put them out or when I'm doing it, etc. And we would work with them to kind of create a timeline. And that might be like 1 track every 3 months, or it might be like, okay, do you know what? Actually, this might work better as an EP, and we just have one focus track. And next year, you're going to go on and do this other project that you've got lined up, or whatever it might be. So yeah, absolutely. Like, we would always advise and give our best advice on the best rollout of something for someone, and whether or not all areas are needed, or whether or not it's the right time. We might say like, oh, do you know what, actually go and work on that for a little while, or like work on a bit more streaming before we come on board and do this, or like, I think absolutely we would always like give our best advice for something.
Yeah. Oh, good. Well, it's about time that you're ready to answer. Thankfully, a lot of questions. So, first of all, thanks everyone for putting all the questions in the chat. I'm going to run through as many as possible. And yeah, we've got so many. So let's start. How can people get PR on side without paying big prices for it? That came from Kathy Keogh.
I think at the like PR, like any of these things cost money. I think it's I think so. If you're going to get PR, it's about that you're going to have a budget for it. I would always say, as and where we can, we work with budgets as much as we can. So I think it's always worth asking and saying, and making it clear from the get-go, look, this is my budget, this is what I've got to work with. And someone might come back to you and say, we just can't do it for that. Someone else might come back to you and say, yeah, do you know what, we might be able to do X, Y, and Z for that. So I think it's just, like, always have that conversation. Like I said, like, I can't speak for every single company, but we definitely we can try and tailor things as and when necessary, if like we're able to do it and we feel like like the track's worthy of doing that.
We've got some questions still around price. I might try and bunch a couple together. Theo says, what's a good price for 6-week press PR? But also, kind of, if you could jump on this one as well. Aaliyah says, for an emerging artist looking for a PR person at a budget of give or take 500 a month, where would you suggest finding good PR people and companies? So I guess firstly, kind of, what is a good price for a 6-week press? And then secondly, where do you find the good ones?
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, I think you're probably looking for a campaign, whether or not that be kind of a month, like 2 months, 6 weeks kind of time. I think you're probably looking at anywhere from about 500 quid a month up to maybe like £1,500 a month.
Right.
And I think generally speaking, yeah, like kind of especially for that emerging, I would say probably you're looking at somewhere around like £200 a week-ish, £150, £200 a week-ish. I think that's probably your kind of ballpark figure with a lot of these guys. And what was the other question about where do you find good PR?
Yeah, is there like a directory? Like where do we find that list where we're like, oh,
right. One thing I say, I always try and advise artists. So if you've seen certain artists and you think like, usually you've got a general awareness of like other people that are doing a similar kind of thing to you. So when you're doing that, I would tend to suggest looking at who's reacting really well, and like if you've seen like an artist doing lots of different things and they're like posting on Instagram every 5 seconds and they've got an ocean shoot and they've got Clash and they've got this and they've got that and the other, and you're like, oh my god, how are these getting not like all this stuff? Like, find out who's doing it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think like, and especially if they like, like that's a great starting point. But other than that, kind of like when you're in the, like, like you kind of in the circles, like ask the questions, like ask people, like, who do you recommend? Like, there's nothing better than a recommendation, like in my eyes. And I think the more you speak to people, like the more you can kind of get out of them. Like, don't be afraid to ask that question. Oh, have you got anyone? And again, like if you've been doing like a lot of things yourself, like radio, PR, etc., for example, we got an inquiry today of an artist I've never worked with before, and they said, "Oh, we were, like, would you check this out? Like, I'm looking to do a campaign. We've been recommended by one of the One Extra DJs to come to you."
Okay.
So I think, like, like if you're doing some of that groundwork yourself, go to some of these guys that are receiving stuff from PR companies every day and ask them too.
Yeah, and I guess you said about Clash and Notion and those magazines. Jay Brown Hartley says, "How would you suggest independently pitching to online magazines and radio? Who do you contact? What would you send?"
Sure. So again, like in a similar kind of vein, like I think identify kind of who it is. You might go, for example, you might go onto one of the online magazines, find an article that like you really like, it's like the way it's written, whatever it might be, and you might like identify the journalist, hit the journalist up, like with DMs on Instagram. Loads of them have got like their emails on there. Like if not, go go to the Notion website, get an the editor email address, pitch to them. It's like all the information is always there. Like it's super, super simple. And the same thing, I mean, like, the biggest directory for any of these things now is social media. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like literally a case of like following them, like building that rapport with them, shooting them an email over. And in terms of kind of what to send them, again, like, kind of what I said to you before, like give them a bit of the blurb on yourself, like, like talk about who you are, what you've done, like obviously, kind of don't just go in, this is just me, like make it warm, like like kind of consider them as well, like like make it very real and make it like very personable, and then send them like that pack, whether it be WeTransfer or whatever kind of link you want to use, and send them that pack and just make it like, one click and they're in it and they can see artwork, press shots, like radio edits, like make sure they are clean radio edits if you're sending to radio, and you send the original as well, and then they've got everything there, and make sure it's all labelled, ready to go, and make it as easy as you can for them.
Yeah, and Laura Dia has said, which kind of follows on from this, how do you maintain the relationship with platforms that have supported you before if you're doing your own PR? And I guess how would you also then maintain those relationships with those contacts that you've started to create?
Yeah, well, I think like once you've done that, and again, you're going to get knockbacks. You're probably going to get ignored sometimes, right? And I think the biggest thing is never take that personally. Like these guys get a million emails. They're getting off different artists. They're getting off PRs. They're getting off everybody. So like if they ignore you, don't just like what I would say is maybe leave a few days at least and politely follow them up, like, hi, just checking that you got this, like, If they don't respond, sometimes it might genuinely be overlooked. Sometimes they might check their emails once a week. So I think bear those things in mind, but don't ever take it personally. And then once you've got the ball rolling with them, and even if they have ignored you the first time, when it comes down to your next release, I mean, give them time. Do you know what I mean? Like I wouldn't be doing like one every week or whatever, but I think like when it comes down to your next release, whether or that be like a month, 2 months later or whatever, hit them up again, like, hi, I sent this, hi, like I sent this over last time, like like I'm just checking, like if you like I'd like to send you this one now, and and like slowly build that up. And if you get support on it, even better. Like go back to them, thanks so much, I'm supporting the last release, I've got a new release, would love to get it over to you first, build it that way.
Yeah, funny enough, the cool thing happened to me as we were
right. I know,
apology. I know. I told you it happened to one of us. So KO, they've said, do you have any advice for the first time release? What makes something not good for radio?
I think for radio, you have got to be just aware, right? So it's like, like when you're sending something to radio, like you've got to be aware, like when you're identifying your targets for who you're sending it to, like are they playing things of a similar kind of ilk? Like does it fit with the kind of playlist that they are playing? and like obviously mixed, mastered, like like super key, make sure it's clean, like kind of no like references to anything it shouldn't have, all that kind of thing. Send them lyrics, it's always good, like like in that pack that I told you like to send, like you obviously send a bit of a bio, press release. Lyrics are always a good one to send, just in case like like they might have misheard something or anything like that, and they can literally go through it with a fine-tooth comb and say, oh, okay. And if they then need to make like any slight additional edits on it, they might just do a quick reversal or something like that. But I think like like that's always a kind of good one, especially if you're going to radio.
Yeah. And Rianne has said, how can a promoter slash live music programmer use these tips as leverage to gain media coverage?
um Tell me again,
How can a promoter slash live music programmer use these tips as leverage to gain media coverage?
for themselves.
I would guess so. I mean, Rianne, if you want to drop a little follow up with some detail a bit more on your question, then maybe we can get the precise answer
Yeah.
they might be looking for. I'll carry on though quickly and then we'll
Yeah.
segue. Firefox says, for an emerging Irish artist wanting to branch out into the UK market, what should their focus be? Radio, getting UK press, reviews? Like, is there one to go for first as your next step?
So we've actually worked with quite a few emerging Irish artists before, and I would say, radio's a nice place to start. I think also the radio and PR are always good places to start, especially if you've already built, kind of like some really nice support locally. And I think that goes for kind of anyone, like, like having that local support's really good, like BBC introducing like local media, local radio, etc., etc. And then kind of like taking it to a more national level. It's always, like it's always great. And I think that generally speaking, like, kind of media platforms are much more open now to kind of like embracing like different areas and kind of like accents or different like artists from different regions. I think like that's like people are all over that now, and I think that like that's a nice kind of segue. So I think as long as you've built up something locally first, it can be like quite an easy segue to go into like finding like key platforms in other areas.
Yeah. I'm next question we've got from Zoe. It's quite a long question, so I've kind of read it. I'm gonna try and read it again. I haven't got my glasses on. But I'm gonna try and paraphrase a little bit. Basically, Zoe's been played on BBC Introducing radio stations, and they've had tracks on Spotify, editorial playlists. They can't currently afford to pay for a PR company, but they've had people who've helped them with their press release. They've sent out publications, and basically they've just heard radio silence. How do you stay positive and, I guess, deal with those knockbacks?
Yeah, it's difficult, and I think that this is probably one of the key challenges that an emerging like artist has, because you're doing everything yourself. And like I said before, like when it's your baby, you've got so much belief in it, and like that's your music. To kind of get those like no's and like those non-replies and stuff, it can be like really soul destroying. And I think that it's so important not to take that personally. Like they are getting so much stuff through. So I think, like I said to you before, having like following up, like like, and also just check the way that you're sending stuff originally. Like like, are you sending them everything that they need? Like, is it not, like make sure it's not too much information as well. Like make it snappy, make it polite, make it clear. Have a follow up, like like a few days later or anything, or like something, and then on the back of that, like if you're going again, reference it. Oh, like I've sent this over to you previously, because then it shows you're consistent. It shows that you're consistent. It shows that you keep knocking on that door, and like, yeah, a lot. If people aren't feeling it or don't want to go for it, then a lot of people don't reply. Like you're not going to get you won't always get a response at all. But I just think like like keep that consistency, and like eventually you'll start like like breaking down the doors 100%.
Right.
I
And
tell you why
Aaliyah,
more. Like, you need to go to a wide, like, group of people when you do this as well. It's not just like, oh, like I'll send it to like 5, 10 people or whatever. It needs to be like quite a
right.
wide range of people to get it to, to kind of get it out there.
So maybe it's always looking at those different things and what
Yeah.
I guess you're doing as an artist. Aaliyah has said, if you know the artist who's similar to you, how do you find their PR person? Is it just Google?
Yeah, literally. Go to
Oh,
Google. So yeah, no, 100%. Go like usually most PR companies will post about what they're working. So kind of you can trace it back that way. They're usually added within kind of the like with the artist and all that kind of thing. But like yeah, a simple Google search will usually like tell it up for you
oh,
and show you who's doing it.
beautiful. I think we've just got a last couple of questions. I know we're running over a little bit, so I hope you're okay to stay just
Oh no,
for
it's all good. No, no, I take them.
amazing. And everyone, by the way, this will be on YouTube still after in a couple days or weeks, so you can watch it back. Let me run through. So, Rianne got back to us and said media coverage for the platform as a brand. Um,
Right, so this is quite different, and we get this quite a lot because actually, media coverage for a brand is actually marketing more than it is PR.
right.
Because what you tend to find when it comes down to, I had this, I literally had this conversation with someone today that was asking me a very similar thing. But what you find is that for many platforms, if you're trying to basically promote your platform with them, they'll just see that as advertising. So you need to look at kind of like you need to, and that comes at a premium. Like you do get platforms that will support things, um, but yeah, they will see it as advertising. So usually you need to look at it in more of a marketing way than you do as like more of a PR front.
Right, I see. And our last question, um, which was, do you have any advice for a first time release?
Um, Yeah, like I think that if you're doing it, like if you're doing it by yourself, I think, like I say, kind of make sure everything you're doing, like it's looking professional. Kind of make sure those emails that you're sending to people are personal, professional. They have all the right information in it, like everything that's like titled correctly, etc., etc. And then I would say that also, like do your research first, kind of like get your target list together. Like if you're doing radio, like look at your targets for radio, look at your targets, like on the media side, journalists, like, editors of like platforms, all that kind of thing. And then, yeah, and then you can like, build through that, pitch into that, and then obviously look for that support with them.
All right, amazing. Well, Kat, honestly, thank you so much because this has been one of the most insightful conversations, and it was just amazing to speak to you, speak to somebody who's so influential in the industry, knows so much, and has just been so, as you said, like open, honest, and transparent. I think it's been amazing.
Oh, thank you. I look, and I know there's like other people that have popped up with questions, but if anyone ever wants to kind of like hit me up, then drop us an email over at like 10letter info@10letter.co.uk.
Right,
Like absolutely more than happy to help as and where we can and kind of like guide you and do anything that we need to do.
amazing. Thank you so much. That's so kind.
You're welcome. Thanks so much, everyone. I hope it's been
Ah,
helpful.
it's been great. But yeah, thank you everyone as well for tuning in, and yeah, we'll see you in a few weeks' time.